Hey, man, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm ready to go. You played Massey Hall the other week, and
So much has happened in that week.
I know it's an incredible amount of things that have gone down. I became a billionaire.
I cannot believe that they found evidence of extraterrestrial life on the comet.
It was amazing, and they all looked like Abe Vigoda. Wasn't that the oddest thing in the world?
I know, but Abe Vigoda, if it were like little pieces of cereal, like because there were, you know what I mean, the way that they sort of all came prepackaged in these little boxes.
It was the Abe Vigoda life
At
cereal
least we
boxes.
know that we didn't invent boxes. It's something that
No, or
we're
cereal.
tapping into. It was a cosmic thing.
It is. That's it for the interview, by the way. Nice to have
Thanks
you
for having
here.
me. Goodbye.
You played Massey Hall a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
I was talking to some friends of mine. So I'm from Newfoundland, which is a 2.5 hour.
I can detect the very minuscule Lord of the Rings-esque parts of your dialect.
I'm half Hobbit,
Yes.
and it's like 3 hours away.
Half Hobbit. I saw them open for Pearl Jam in '97. They were terrible. They were truly terrible.
Yeah, they never made it.
They could never reach the knobs on the amps.
It was a different time. So like 3 hours away on a flight, and they traveled all the way to see it. And I was talking to a number of people last night who had traveled from very far around Canada to come see you play last night. And because they really haven't seen you play in a long time, or have had an opportunity to see you play in a long time. So how did it feel to be back up there?
Well, I love Massey Hall. I love playing in Toronto. I know you guys say it Toronto.
Yeah.
And I always have a good time. I always typically have a really good time up here. I don't think I've ever had a real bad show or bad time up here that I can remember. And so I actually don't normally look at my schedule, but when I saw that Massey Hall was on it a couple days ago, I got super excited. I mean, a week and a half, some days ago. And anyway, that room sounds really pretty great. It's interesting. I too see it quite often on Twitter, different places that people travel to the shows. But I really like that. There's something interesting about that. I'm hoping that it isn't like the same. I'm not hitting the same like 3,000 people like countrywide for each territory, and they're just traveling. But I think there are some people back in the day when I toured a lot more with the Cardinals. That band was really just all about touring. I think that there became kind of there was a scene to go see all those shows, but it's pretty cool. Like there's such an interesting vibe with The Shining with this band, because we could play virtually the same set 2 nights, and it isn't like we're trying to ever make anything radically different.
Right.
And there really is no thought as to what's going to happen. I think that there's like a unspoken kindred musical spirit that's sort of attached on to us from my studio in LA, and it has followed us so that we will play like these sets, and they're just drastically different in the best possible way. It's like the mood of us and the audience, or the vibe, or the excitement level. Like it just is, everything kind of goes into it. And for the first time, I'm playing older songs, even songs like Magnolia Mountain, and I can honestly say this. I haven't said it to them, and so hopefully they'll never hear this, but it's like I hear them reaching their potential. Like I hear my songs reaching their potential. Like that's insane. Like to play Magnolia Mountain and go, wow, like the night before when we played it, I remember going, it wasn't just the best time I ever played it, it was the most connected I'd ever felt to it. Like I understood it in a completely different way. And that's such a different thing than the force of performance, because much of live performance for a musician, for fans that don't see, is the haul to get where you're going, and the long bus ride or whatever it is. And although I'm not trying to say like, oh, poor anybody for that kind of a lifestyle, but there is quite a haul that it to get where you're going, and a lot of intervals and a lot of strangeness on a continual basis. And then you get to this place, and you to play the kind of music we're playing, it's like then you're just going to share these intimacies, musical and lyrical. So what's weird is there's just been this comfortability, and it's been really infectious. It's been where the band and the audience, I just see this great chilling happening. It's kind of cool.
I
It's
mean, it seems very enjoyable. Like one thing I
yeah.
noticed from last night and from even just that performance, even then, and I've been a fan of yours for many years. And I don't want to say that you've never looked like you've had fun. You've always looked like you're having a lot of fun, but you really did seem like you were enjoying yourself with the band. I know in Cold Roses, you really stretched, and it seemed like you kind of lost yourself in that sea of people.
Yeah, totally. It's like that at every night. We should have had a bad gig recently in Cleveland. We played there, and um,
Why should it have been bad?
uh, well, it wasn't bad, which is what's interesting. But like, once in a while, you get to a town, and it's usually a place that's out of your regular touring circuit, and like maybe the vibes of like what you're doing haven't permeated in there yet,
Hmm.
so it's just something to do for college, or maybe you get like a certain subsect of the audience that are sort of more interested in like partying or disruption. And because for some people it's like a $35 or $45 ticket to go and freak out at a show is not a big deal, and
Hmm.
in any way. So you get certain places, and um, they're vocal members of the audience. They're not always hecklers. It's just there's excited people, but there really are, like specifically in the United States, like there are super disgruntled, weird audience members that you deal with on a consistent basis for any concert, or people do. They're just out there. It's really
Why do they go?
well, I don't know, because I'm a musician, so I'm on the other side of the guitar. I
Right.
assume they're just wasted,
Right.
or they are with a romantic partner and they're both wasted, or something. I don't think it's somebody who just goes like, I'm going to get bombed tonight alone and go to this concert and go see like Bachman Turner Overdrive, and
Right.
like, you know what I mean? It's not like it's not like that. But anyway, so sometimes you get a vibe, like you get a weird vibe, um and I remember that a lot of times in the Cardinals, or even all the way back to Whiskey Town, there was a force of performance. It was like trying to sort of take over the room with the music and lay down the law. And it's interesting with this band, there's just it's lawlessness in this most peaceful way. Like it would just kind of go on stage, it just kind of starts to happen. And usually by the second or third song, like the show's taken away with itself, because we don't really know what's going on. We don't really have stuff worked out. We've all kind of it's all sort of worked out on its own.
Hmm.
It's very interesting. It's also probably the most stoned I've ever been on stage ever with any band.
Because for a while there, you weren't smoking a whole lot of pot at one point. I remember in one interview you
Yeah,
said you were taking THC pills
yeah.
to try to help with some health issues that you were going through. How is that affecting your performance? How is that affecting the show?
Well, THC pills, I think, are really like, well, the pills, the edible stuff is
Yeah.
really good to take before you go to bed. So you like lower your blood. For me, it's like my blood pressure and stuff really decreases while I'm sleeping, and it like sets a tone for when I wake up. And I find like Meniere's disease. I think that most people, for me, and most of the stories I hear from people, is that your susceptibility is the first thing in the morning.
Hmm.
Like that first hour determines everything. Are you going to have coffee? You're going to get Meniere's disease.
Right.
You're going to have a Meniere's episode, Or if you get up and someone sends you a stressful email, or a text, or there's a lot of different things that could set you off. So
But you said you've been kind of smoking a little bit more pot or vaporizing a bit more pot before you go on stage. How's that affecting your performance? How's that affecting your enjoyment of the music you're making?
do you think I'm more self-conscious when I go into instrumental sections in like the best possible way?
Right.
No, it's really nice. If anything, it's sort of this. There's a level of trust that it's like everything's good. Like because it just basically for me means that I'm listening more, and my perspective of the show is more open, and it's just a nice vibe.
Right.
You don't get stoned around people or situations you're uncomfortable with, or typically people do not.
Not when you're doing your taxes.
Yeah, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
Just to talk a little bit about this record, there's words from critics, and when you read this, that this is a rock record. This is Ryan Adams' most rock
I haven't
record.
read a single thing for this one. It's so weird.
You haven't read a review yet?
No, it's twice in a row. I haven't. I don't know what anybody thought about it.
Do you typically read them for the previous records?
I used to care, then I used to feign that I didn't care, but I cared. And then
Right.
I used to purposefully not look, to purposefully try to not look. And then I actually really did attach to the apathy of not caring. And now I totally do not care in any way.
Do you not no Googling of yourself, no nothing?
No, I just do not care at all. It's so interesting. It's so wonderful. This is a total breakthrough of age.
Right.
I just don't care. I just know I know I'm gonna be able to go play shows, and I know people are gonna like it, and I know I like it, and it's so weird. I just move on right away.
But it is an interesting backstory behind this record because it isn't the story behind this record is that there was one before. As the story goes,
There were two before.
well, you had a whole record done. You had one full record done.
Yes.
With Glyn Johns, and you decided to shelve it. What did that album sound like in comparison to this one?
You know, for me, like I was listening to "Goat's Head Soup" by the Rolling Stones just the other night
Mm-hmm.
while I was drawing comic books on the bus,
Right.
and I was listening to how wonderful that record is, and how and this is a record that I remember speaking to Glyn Johns about, who he didn't remember making that record, not because he was wasted, because if you know Glyn, it's not his style. He likes a glass of red wine now and again, but it's not his style. He's a
Sure.
masterful engineer, but mainly I think his philosophy is to record it as it is. And when he records a rock band, I think that he's seeing it the way that, like, you would basically see a jazz band or a big band jazz or classical. He's listening for a one unified sound and how that makes sense. And so the thing is by the time I got ready to make my record with the follow-up to Ashes and Fire, the studio that I built was exactly next door to the studio where I made, that record, Ashes and Fire. And that's the room that he's loved for years. And I basically built my room to be like a punk rock sort of version of Motown. Everything's kind of, it's two floors. It's in kind of like this cottaged house that's right next to the studio on the studio property. The control room is in an old living room. The vocal ISO booth is like what would be like a room next to a kitchen. And then the live floor is upstairs, like 3 bedrooms turned into one long railroad of a place, and then an office to write in. So the setup is unconventional, but strangely, you get great results. I think mainly because the education that Paxam has given me is one that I didn't have to learn a lesson I already knew, which was you can make anything sound great if your intentions are great.
Mm-hmm.
Because, some of my favorite recordings are done in a house. That's just like where they were able to record the record. And you move a console in and you find, oh, you know what? The bass sounds really good behind that chair. I don't know why it sounds good there, but it does. And I think that that's such an interesting thing.
But was that difficult for you to have an entire album made, to have spent the time writing these songs, recording these songs, and then to not release it? And
No, because I was next door making that record, knowing that really where I should be was, I was in the professional studio that cost every 4 days what the rent on my place cost every month.
right.
Going, why am I in here when I could be next door at this Millennium Falcon type studio that has all my guitars built into it? I designed it. I drew it out and had it built exactly the way I wanted, and it was functional. And it was the problem of me going like, yeah, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing right now, and I'm doing this with Glyn again because I thought it would be interesting. But I know next door is a new path. It's something closer to me. And when I finished the record with Glyn, I knew that I had made something that conventionally would have worked, but I didn't think that it would have been like an oracle of any kind. I didn't feel like there would be any actual principle, like musical, magical element to it that would lead to anything new. And my presumptions were 100% correct.
Right.
I might have taken a different path. I mean, the path that I took before was, it looked very, when I played the Prince's Cancer Trust in England, the only show I did around the post Ashes and Fire time, I played some of the songs from that Glyn record.
Right.
And I played it with Don Was on bass,
Mhm.
Ethan Johns on guitar, and Ben Montench on organ, and Jeremy Stacy was on the drums, and Cindy Cashdollar on the steel. And I just remember looking at that band and thinking about the kind of music that was happening that night. And I just remember thinking, this is not sustainable. This is not my correct path. This is the wrong path. This is not the way forward. Mainly because I cannot have those musicians. I cannot have that life. It's not sustainable to me. And the songs also, like, the best I could say is this. Like, my job is probably, when it's not about me, my job is probably to isolate parts of a day that are avoided by most people, whether it's with a sigh or they shake their head and brush it off and try to put it out of their mind, or they smoke a cigarette, or they do something to abate and move this thing away from them. And it's like my job is like, when it's not just about Ryan exploring Ryan's stuff, is I'm like a plumber, and I have to go in and I have to unblock that for people. I have to figure out what that is. And the way I have to figure out what that is I have to figure it out with me by watching somebody else have that same thing and then find it out with me. And so when I made the Glyn record, what I noticed is I was only removing enough of the block to just get the job done, to just let the flow through. But I wasn't really unclogging anything. I wasn't really correcting it. I wasn't really self-examining, because I knew that there was serious stuff to discuss. I knew that there was real stuff all around me. And I felt like the way I wrote the songs for the Glyn record was like the same attitude that people have when they do that thing, like where they sigh or they brush it off or they don't deal with it. It was like these songs are a musical version of that.
And so if you were to isolate, though, the difference, so like compare and contrast the difference between the Glyn record, you leave that record and you go in and make this fabulous new self-titled record. What was the difference between the new record and the Glyn record?
The Glyn record is like a heating pad, and the new record is like, it's like a city block on fire.
Right.
It's like an entirely different kind of heat.
And you made it without a producer at all. And though you have always been someone who's embraced a lot of collaboration on a lot of your major label releases, or a lot of your major releases.
Well, it is produced sort of. I mean, Mike Viola came in on the second half,
Right.
and helped me tie it down, because the way that the universe worked out is he and I opened up the floodgates by making this like 28 song kind of recording called Alien USA that was basically like, I was like, I want to do songwriter stuff and I want to reincorporate the sounds of like punk rock, hardcore, and 80s music. But the 80s stuff that people have forgotten about, like the Henleyisms and Bruce Hornsby and the Range stuff, like just tastes of that, and mix it with my sound, because it's always been kind of hiding in there. So he and I did this thing where we went, let's do it all too much. Like, we just sat down and said, like, let's just do it to the extreme so we could see what's too much, kind of. Without thinking, we just went so far into this zone that it's like, it was really nice. It's like the first time that you build like a model kit, or you want to like design whatever your first thing is going to be. It's going to be too crazy. So we made this thing that's too crazy, which was nice, because it was like, I had the Glyn thing behind me where I was like, that's vague. I'm not touching the fire at all. Then we make this thing that's totally wild and crazy and fun, and took a couple of months, and I went, okay, cool. We got that out of our system. Like, we know how fast that is. So we know like the appropriate speed, like the appropriate amount of stuff of that vibe to add in, the fun and the danger and the pain and all that. It just sort of opened me up a little bit. It was kind of like saying like, cool, let's see how this car really drives. Let's really learn how to use it by wrecking it, and then we'll get another one and we'll know.
But you also had the freedom of not having rented the car, because you didn't have to pay for the daily studio.
I could have very easily done the Glyn record, and everybody would have been fine. It had done nothing, and it had just disappeared, faded into obscurity, in my opinion. But like,
but you had this in your studio for this new record. It was your studio. It was your room, and so did that freedom.
But Pac Sam, it's its own thing.
Yeah,
it's like it's a kind of combination between like the Munsters house or something, and like a Motowny vibe, or like an old RCAB studio. Like, it's weird.
Right.
Like, it's private. You can't rent it. It's all of our stuff is in it. It's always on. it's like it's like right in the center of LA, so like you could walk around to the record store in different places. It functions in a very different way than the rest of LA functions.
How did that contribute to the making of the record? The idea that you didn't have a time to
Well,
end.
so what happened was is Mike had to go onto this other record,
Right.
which was great because during that time is when I had song breakthrough, where I like wrote "Give Me Something Good" and "Shadows" and "Stay With Me" in the same day, like jamming, on live mics, and they kind of came through. The songs started coming through that looked like it was the correct record, and I just sort of went, okay, cool. I'm gonna call in some of these musicians that I knew that could sort of like get in there and get it on tape the way I wanted in first or second takes, And I just sort of carved the record out in a really short amount of time. I think it was 10 days, maybe less. And then as soon as I had the basics down, I added a tiny little bit of stuff. And then I had sort of called Mike and said, you need to come over here because I don't know what I made. And like, I just want to see what you would do to it. Because,
Mhm.
on a Studer A800 24 track machine, you only have a certain amount of tracks left over.
Right.
And I think it's roughly 4 to 6 tracks, maybe, left over for each track. So I had to be careful about what I added. And I did need a lot. So he came over and carved into it for a minute. And a few of them really grew. And then some of them didn't need anything. They just stayed the way they were. Maybe maybe like 1 or 2 vocal things. It's virtually the way that it was. Mike did stuff like Give Me Something Good. I came in and I was like waiting to hear what he did, but it was so like carefully placed. There was these little very minuscule nuances that are hiding, and then a 12-string guitar solo where you thought somebody would rip a guitar. Things like that, like stuff that I can't, like stuff that I don't know about because I don't have like those records that he has. He has a lot of like who's the guy that dressed up like a bumblebee or something? Todd Rundgren, whatever that guy is.
Mhm.
He has all that stuff.
But it's
All
funny,
that stuff that people listen to Beatles or whatever that is.
but you don't.
Yeah, whatever that music is.
Right. But there is, speaking of the Beatles, speaking of Todd Rundgren, speaking of Husker Du, speaking of Ben Montench, there is this tendency since you started, and I've been following your career I've been a fan of yours for a really long time, man. And there's always been this tendency to isolate your records and compare them to another artist immediately. When you came out, there was the Dylan comparison, there was the Graham Parsons comparison, there was the Jerry Garcia comparison, and I know you haven't been reading the reviews, but there is this Tom Petty line you're seeing in a lot of these reviews. Why do you think there is this tendency to need to match your music with an existing artist?
Well, I don't know.
No,
I mean, do most of these music journalists like weren't they? They probably wanted to be. They probably wanted to write for the Atlantic or something.
right?
They're like writing Ryan Adams record reviews. Like you have to feel bad for these people. They're a couple adjectives short of like Bonfire of the Vanities. I don't know. I mean, I mean, a member of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers is on my new record.
Yeah,
So there's that.
yeah.
Um,
But why? Like,
Tom Petty's voice is weird to me. Doesn't sound like my voice a whole lot.
but I often think that they just do that because they don't have a frame of reference for the kind of music that you're making.
Well, compartmentalization has become like a compartmentalization is for art has sort of was fed to everybody. It was fed to everybody back when MTV broke up. Sort of instead of playing Ozzy videos next to Cyndi Lauper videos, when they broke it up and made like the metal show in 120 minutes, and then like radio started doing it. They started having predominantly like pop station and country station and then metal station, and it's like you see the compartmentalization of music and it's sort of the way that it seems to me like the cultural worlds deal with in this one-minded way. It's maybe the way that people deal with having to process this information, but in my opinion, it's I mean, there's nothing that because the music exists, because a record exists, and because you exist, the way that you interpolate the information on the record, the way that you consume it, it can't really be affected by somebody's somebody's synopsis of it. Somebody could tell you like, I saw Titanic, it was terrible. It's not worth seeing.
Right.
And you could just go at the right moment and be very emotional and maybe be into sailing.
Mhm.
And you could have the best time watching this epic, weird film about this boat. You know what I mean? Like it just it doesn't it's like it doesn't matter. You know.
But you've been so vocal, and it's one thing that's been great is when you become a fan of your music, you learn about other bands. You wear the T-shirts with the bands you care about. You speak in interviews about the bands you care about, the bands that have influenced you, and the bands you like to listen
Yeah,
to.
well, I totally love Jerry Garcia's guitar playing,
Right.
but I love Greg Ginn's guitar playing from
Right.
Black Flag, and I think that there's an element of both things, and
Sure.
also like Sonic Youth, and
Yeah.
there's all that stuff is in there, and certainly all the stuff that I've listened to along the way has educated or become part of what I do. It's definitely, but that's how.
But now you're
yeah.
becoming that too. I mean, there's a generation of young songwriters.
I don't understand the Graham Parsons thing though.
I think
I always think that he sings like a big baby.
But I think in the early days there was just a need.
He sounds like a big. He just sounds like a big. Like he does. Sounds like a big baby man.
like a big baby. Well, he was a young guy. He got kind of cut down in his prime. You know, maybe he would have.
No. I mean his voice. He just sounds very. It sounds like really soft.
Right.
It sounds really like I don't know what he's talking about.
I think there was that tendency at the beginning because people just kind of wanted there to be another Graham Parsons. There were folks in that kind of who came out of Uncle Tupelo, came out of Whiskeytown, and really loving these kind of bands, and just kind of wanted to do a fix. I don't necessarily think it had anything to do with your music, but one thing I find interesting is now there are young artists you speak to who claim that you are their influence. The same way you speak about bands you loved in the 80s and bands in the 90s and bands now, there are a number of groups who claim you as their largest influence.
Who are these people?
I mean, Jason Isbell would be the one to come, for example. I mean, he's spoken highly about you.
He has his own thing.
But he posts up videos of you, and he posts up your album covers on his Instagram, and talks about how much you mean to him.
I don't have Instagram.
Well, yeah, but if you ever get it, you'll see that Jason Isbell has those photos. I was just wondering.
I've been washing my hands like twice as much as normal, so I don't catch Instagram.
But how does it feel? How does it feel to be influencing these people the same way that these artists once influenced you?
Well, it's just, I don't know. It's like one step closer to eating their souls. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing.
Right.
I feel bad for them. They should listen to better music. Like I mean, I don't rate my stuff. I just know what I'm doing. I know how it feels to me, and my stuff never feels quite as good as the records I love. Which is really wonderful. It's a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'm doing my thing, but I don't rate my thing because it's not my place. I can only be Ryan. I can't also be an observer of myself in a way where then I also then rate myself, because that's not real. That's a mirror. And that's not what I'm here to do. That's not what people are supposed to do. That's stuff that you get taught by iPhones and by video chatting. Well, the idea that you then have to rate your own self as opposed to just being organically like inspired, and you make a thing and that thing feels good and it feels true to what you've built, and then it'd be like a carpenter and say like everything I build I'm going to use. Well, you'd be in this huge wooden prison in no time. You have to make what you make with good intentions and set it out in the world, and you know your intention when you've made it. You know how you feel about it, and in my opinion, art is for me is a free zone. It is a bullshit free area. So it's free of like criticism. It's at least self-criticism. It's free. Like I have a light switch, right? And there are people, I could play a song for someone, but the intention was great and I had a great time doing it and I meant it. And if somebody wants to go over and flip the switch on what I just did, like they're just going to find the rectangle. There's no switch there. There's nothing there. They can't say anything about it to me, like, because it happened. It's done. It's over. And that to me is part of this way that I think I get to new work, and I don't have to interest myself in late style or early style or self-comparison or self-criticism. Is I don't believe in that mirror.
Do you mind singing the old songs still when you play live?
I love them. Some of them I think I love them more now than I ever did. In fact, some of them I think I get them right now. Like I actually hear the nuance in them that I was looking for before. But I think you become like a better, or I have become a better listener as I've gone along on my own material. Like I hear more what I think I was edging towards. Like I see the open path in like a bridge section, or maybe I realize I'm like, oh wow, like when I do this a little softer in this key, there's something new there for me. But the point is, um, the journey of like music for me, like the artistry, or this sounds like Dylan, or this sounds like Tom Petty. That's all good stuff,
Right.
because those people do exist, and they really did make music, and that's cool.
Mhm.
But I see a general overarching thing when I see all the names that people talk about. Is I see songwriters, and I think that that's a thing, like songwriters that don't have a niche or a gimmick. Tom Petty had no gimmick. He
Mhm.
just was this guy.
Right.
He wrote songs.
Yeah.
Bob Dylan, for quite much of his career, was like, you couldn't pigeonhole him. He was just like, I'm just this weirdo. I'm making all these songs, and there really was no gimmick. And then, Graham Parsons, for the most part, even though he did quite a lot of covers, he was like, I'm this big baby man, and make this music.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but the day and age and the time of just a songwriter, that where there's not a style, or it's like we're in a band, like we're the Sandwiches, like we're the new sound, the Sandwiches, like, and everything like is 18, has like 18 measures in it, and like we're all wearing like suits or something. Like there's nothing to that with what I do. Like my thing is just about like what kind of story can I tell, what's in me that day, like what song wants to be written, what thing is on my mind, and that's a very different kind of. I think it's a different sort of way to be.
I think just one more question before we get you to play some more music. You have the studio, you have the label, and you have this kind of new idea. Maybe not a new idea, but an idea of almost exactly what you want to do, the kind of music that you want to make, or just the way you want to make music. What can we expect soon? What can we expect down the pipe? Are you going to continue making music on a regular basis, or will there be another 3-year wait before the next record?
No, the 3 years really was the fact that I went next door from where I was recording the record with Glenn, and went into my own studio and said, I want to really learn how to use this place the way that I've always wanted to, which is get up Monday through Friday, go and make music like 8 hours, like a job, like go and actually do that, and then do it for fun also. I wanted that experience, and that experience, like after that amount of time, actually led to so many recordings that I think we could do a single a month for a long, long time, and not have it get in the way of another record.
And is that the way you want to make? Is that the way you think music should be made now? Is that there should be less of an
I don't think anything about what anybody should
right?
do.
But there is now that the music industry has definitely changed. There's a definite freedom. Artists are releasing more EPs. Artists are releasing more singles. It's almost like it was in the 1940s and 1950s, where not as many long playing albums are coming out. Do you think that's a positive trend? Do you think that are you happy to release shorter material more often rather than waiting stretches for a long record?
I personally think that the single, it has not been dignified in quite a long time. The idea of a 7-inch single also having an opportunity to be this dignified, beautiful thing. Like when I first started getting into the idea of the Pac-Sam 7-inch series, I wanted to do a subscription, but that's even too difficult nowadays, because you have to remember that there's so many vocal people who would be receiving it, that it also equals the 11 to 18 people who are confused about when they're getting their order become the loudest, craziest people. You have to do it a really specific way. And for me, it's make the record, tell them it's ready, let them buy it, and then have it be what it is. But when I originally was trying to do this idea, I would hear things like, that's too good for a single. And I would be like,
What does that mean?
well, because the idea of a 7-inch single and its own exclusivity being something that could be on a record or whatever, the idea would be that you were throwing it away because of the format. And for me,
Right.
my feeling is that a 7-inch or a 45, 2 songs, maybe a third. I like putting a third on it. I like the number 3. I think it's nice for a 7-inch to have 3 songs. But the idea of dignifying that and making it actually matter more or as much as a record was super crucial to me, because I felt like I have quite a lot of songs that feel good on a 7-inch as an A side, and then other songs that are too wild and they feel good as a B side. Whereas on a record, they're too loud or too fussy for that record. For a record, it's like it's like a museum or like a very exclusive restaurant. Like, you don't want wild ends. You don't, unless that's the record you're making. You want things to sort of, you want a mystery. There's tracks that are meant to only connect. I mean, and the thing that I thought about the most was the Smiths. I was like, in 5 years, you know, it's hard for people to remember this and stuff, but things like Hand in Glove, or like that was a 7-inch. Sheila Take a Bow, like Shoplifters of the World, like those were 45s. Like, they were only later put on an LP
Yeah.
of a collection of singles, and like those are perfect records. They're perfect records in every way. The covers are perfect, the recordings are divine, and like, you just had to go down to your shop to get it. And I think nowadays, with the way that the recording industry seems to be, is, the sort of spectator part of it, the sort of people that sort of kind of got into music or sort of into records, the people that were kind of like, I'm trying to find myself as are records for me, they're not in there anymore. And if they are, they're just streaming them or getting them for free. But the people who are really interested in the bands, and I think you do nowadays, it does seem to be there's a more direct line to the people that like what you do, and which is nice, because it means that a person like me, who used to literally be publicly like, I would get the lash for having too much material. Like, I remember in 2004 and 5, like, the resounding vibe that I would see was, oh, this stuff couldn't possibly mean anything because he's made it too quickly, or couldn't really matter to him because he just released a record before, as if somehow like it negated the feeling of the music. And where that was this downside, I think it's become for me like this incredible advantage. I remember one time, like, this friend of mine, this guy Adam Duritz from that band Counting Crows, he's like, your problem is, man, you have too many records.
He told you what your problem was?
We were talking about like records and career
Right.
stuff, and he was like, you have too many records. He's like,
Right.
man, I only have like 4 records or 5 records
Right.
out there. It was at the time when everything was going down. And I just remember thinking, like, I remember thinking at the time, I remember thinking, give me a couple of years. And it changed. It changed. It's like, it doesn't matter. Like, you can no longer really say to somebody like, how dare you make another album? You know what I mean? Like, that's just not the way that it works. It's just your catalog. It's just what you've made. It's just how it's been. And I wouldn't know what else to do,
Ryan, thanks a lot for coming in today, man.
Thank you.
I really appreciate talking to you.
I appreciate coming in here.